So we have a couple of folks who want to be congressmen tonight, and I'm very happy to get that started. So I'm going to introduce the candidates. I'm going to have them join me on stage. We're going to talk about the format for tonight, and so let's get rolling. The first person that I want to introduce, and we're going in alphabetical order, is my friend Kirk Adams. Kirk, if you could come out to the stage. Kirk has lived in Mesa his entire life. He served as a Republican chairman in District 19. He's a former state representative and, more importantly, former Speaker of the House. A lot of good credentials to be a congressman. So thank you, Kirk. Next, I'd like to invite Matt Salmon to the stage. Matt. Has lived in Mesa for more than 40 years and served not only as a state senator, but also is a former congressman. Yeah! So, thank you and welcome, Matt. So now I come over here, that's how the format works, and I take a seat. Let me outline for you how this is going to work. Thank you both for joining us this evening. You're awful close there together, so the rules are pretty simple. No eye gouging, no kicking, no running, no bare feet, all those things. But each candidate, folks, is going to be given 2 minutes to provide an opening statement. The order of the opening was predetermined with a coin toss 1 week ago. Then we will move on to the questioning portion of the debate. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. I would like to introduce Jeff Marisola, who's sitting down here at this fancy-looking table. Jeff will be our timekeeper. Time is very important. And so, Jeff, stand up and be recognized so they don't just see the back of your head. You know? And so Jeff has signs to signal you at the 30-second mark, the 15-second mark, and the stop mark. And then I'll serve as the time police. Don't be time bandits. And if you go over your 2 minutes, I'll let you know. I'd also like to introduce my friend, Ginger Lamb, the publisher of the Arizona Capital Times. Ginger, please stand up. We're fortunate enough to have Ginger asking the questions tonight. Just as a side note, there are probably plenty of tickets still available for the Best of the Capitol event next week that Ginger will be hosting. I also will be emceeing that event as well. So come on out. And I'm into shameless plugs. I'm planning on plugging both of you too before the night's over. So at the end of the question period, at approximately 7:20, we're going to move into the final statements from each of you. Again, you'll have 2 minutes on those, and a limit will be imposed. And so, Mr. Adams, you're going to begin, and Matt, you will start. You will finish. So they put Mr. Adams in here like I don't know anything. Can I buy a credit? Okay. So with that. We're going to keep it focused on answering the questions and discussing the issues, and this should be a lot of fun. And thank you all again for coming out tonight. So let's get it started. I'm going to ask her if you could go ahead and do your opening 2 minutes. Thank you.
It's an honor to be with you tonight. You know, too often in modern political campaigns, we sometimes get mired in the minutiae of the moment. There'll be plenty of time tonight to discuss details in this debate, but what I want to do is lift our eyes and grasp the context of the times in which we live. I think if you look at the sweep of history, you will conclude, as I have, that we are at a pivot point. A pivot point where this generation must literally decide, once again, what it means to be an American. The Revolutionary generation decided, as the Civil War generation. The World War II generation decided and then defeated fascism. And the civil rights generation decided and made this union a more perfect place. And now this generation must decide once again whether the pathway to prosperity and happiness lies within free enterprise or within government. And this is a decision that we cannot run from. The math will not let us. Our national debt is $15.6 trillion, and by 2038, the government will consume fully half of the entire United States economy. The political squabbles of the 1990s are quaint in comparison to this generational choice. And that is why I believe this generational choice requires a new generation of leadership. And therein lies the fundamental judgment that you, the voters, must come up with in this election. And it is this: are the politicians and the political tactics of yesterday sufficient for the challenges of today? I submit to you today that a new generation of leaders is needed. We need leaders who have been in the battle, fighting the battles of this day, not enriching themselves in the corrupt political culture of Washington, D.C. We need leaders who have demonstrated leadership in tough times, leaders who seek out the biggest problems and find solutions. I've been that leader in Arizona. I'll be that leader in Washington, and I'm asking for your vote on August 28th.
Thank you, sir. Now, Matt, your turn.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to... Can you hear me okay? No. How's that? Can you hear me now? First of all, I'd like to thank the East Valley Chambers of Commerce for hosting this event tonight. I believe that the most important thing that we face as a nation is to get our country's budget balanced as quickly as possible. I look out over the crowd and I look at the business leaders that are here tonight. Many of you have been asked for a job. I'm here tonight to apply for a job for the congressman from the 5th Congressional District, and I take this very, very seriously. I never imagined when I kept my term limit pledge and left after 6 years that I'd never be applying for this job again. But I also never imagined that our government would turn a $250 billion surplus that was there when I left into a $16 trillion debt. And so I'm frightened. I'm very frightened. The last thing in the world I need is to be called a congressman again. But I'm afraid of where we're headed. And I believe that this nation has taken a major wrong turn. And I believe that the kind of courage and determination to go in and be an agent of change and have the leadership abilities and the skills and the experience to go back and fight that fight. And not just vote the right way, but convince other people to vote the right way and get our country back on track again is more important now than ever. I also believe that this district needs a champion. It needs somebody that's going to go and fight for business to come to Arizona. We need to have thriving business here in this state. We need to get government off of our backs. I've done an East Valley tour of businesses over the last several months, and they've told me, get government off our backs, get government off our backs. And I want to do just that. I also want to be a champion to go and fight for things like this Center of Excellence for Unmanned Aerial Systems and work with Mayor Smith and the governor to bring high-caliber jobs to this state and get us back on track again. Thank you. I ask for your vote. Ask for your support.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Ginger with the first question tossed to Kirk.
Okay, thank you. Let's begin. Kirk, what do you believe is the appropriate role of conservatism in American politics today, and how do you personally exemplify conservative values?
The appropriate role of conservatism today is to be the adult in the room, to actually look people in the eye and tell the American people the truth about our true financial situation. See, I think Washington, for a very long time, Republicans and Democrats alike, have not been squaring with the American people. And they've consistently tried to tell us that we can continue to spend in these entitlements, we can continue to grow the size of government, and somehow along the way, it's all going to work out. Well, math is not a partisan thing. It's not a Republican or a Democrat. Math just is. And I think the role of the conservatives in the Republican Party today are to be that conscience. Now, I actually have direct experience in this as Speaker of the House, managing through the worst fiscal crisis in state history. Literally, when the state was on the brink of financial collapse, with a record deficit like this state has never been, it was my burden of leadership responsibility to not only make the right decisions, but to convince and persuade others to make those decisions also. That's the kind of perseverance and leadership that I think is desperately missing in Washington, D.C. That's the type of perseverance and leadership I intend to provide.
Thank you, Ginger. I appreciate that question. I believe the proper role of conservatism is to get back to the Constitution. I truly believe if we actually adopted only constitutional principles, this budget would be balanced in a nanosecond. But I also believe in the concept of a free enterprise system, unfettered by government. We've been creeping toward European socialism, not just for the last decade, and Republicans and Democrats have both contributed to the problem. When I was in Congress before, we started with about a $300 billion deficit. It was very daunting. The budget hadn't been balanced in over 40 years. And there was a group of us that even defied our own party leaders. We stood up to them. We fought against even our own party leaders and the committee chairman that wanted to go through and do the pork barrel spending and the same old tired problems of kicking the can down the road, being Democrat light. And the proper role of conservatism is not just to be some party hack, but to fight for American principles of freedom, entrepreneurship, get government off the backs of businesses. Like when I was in Artesia, New Mexico a couple months ago, we have more than enough oil for the next 100 years, but we've got to get regulation off of businesses. I believe that, like John F. Kennedy back in the 60s, who said we're going to land a man on the moon within 10 years, if we said we're going to be energy independent in 10 years, we would. And that ought to be our priority. So I believe that being a true conservative is to get government off the backs of all of our businesses, get government off the backs of good people, and to get the private sector working again. Also, I agree with Kirk, I think the most daunting, most important job that we have is to balance the budget as quickly as possible. That's going to require some very, very tough decisions and saying no to people. That's why when I was in Congress before, I was ranked in the top 5 people by the Citizens Against Government Waste. It's going to take a very, very tough person that's going to be able to go back and turn back the tide.
Since all politics is local, how do you plan to work with the mayors of our East Valley cities to create economic opportunity for the East Valley?
Well, thank you very much. I think one of the really key ingredients that's been missing is cooperation. We have our congressional delegation, we have our county supervisors, we have our state legislators, we have our city mayors and city councils, and they don't talk to each other a lot. I believe that there's a big problem in our state with a big gaping hole, and it's called a lack of leadership. And I will do exactly as I did before. I will meet with our mayors on a regular basis. In fact, when I was in Congress before, I reported to the mayors and the city councils on a quarterly basis, many times before their city councils. I think that's really important that we have that dialogue. I also went and met with our state legislature on a consistent basis. In fact, I testified at hearings, and I understood what they had to say. I think one of the most important issues that we face right now as a community is bringing jobs to our state. And it's not just big box retail and bringing revenues from sales taxes. It's bringing manufacturing jobs. It's bringing brain trust to the city. And I mentioned in my opening remarks, one of the most important things to me is, as I have been doing for the last several months, championing this idea of a center of excellence. The Federal Department of Transportation is going to designate 6 areas as centers for excellence for unmanned aerial systems. Unmanned aerial systems is a new wave of where our defense is going. There will be very few manned aircraft in the future. And I believe that if Arizona becomes one of those 6 designated places, we'll bring thousands of jobs, but we'll also be at the vanguard of protecting our nation. I think that's a win-win across the board. And I've already been working with Mayor Smith and also with ASU, also with our Commerce Authority, in trying to bring that here. And I've been working with our Federal Secretary of Transportation. I believe it's extremely important to elect somebody to go back there that knows where the ropes are, knows the ropes, and can get the job done and hit the ground running.
You know, debates are opportunities for us to draw comparisons. And I have to answer the previous question first as well. Matt, when you were in Congress, they actually increased spending by 22% for the period of time which you were in Congress. And the balanced budget was a bill that you did not even vote for. That stands in stark contrast for the nearly 30% reduction in state spending we did here in the state of Arizona. And as Speaker of the House, my job to craft, negotiate, and pass that bill. Now, to your specific question, I think the key ingredient that we need with a congressman in this district is one of engagement. You know what? You don't always have to pass a bill to help your community. Sometimes you simply have to show interest and be engaged and show up at the meetings and meet with the mayors and the city council members and understand that you have a role that is not necessarily a formal role, but a role nonetheless to promote your community and to advocate for that. I've done that as a representative of the State House here in Mesa. I've engaged with my local community leaders, and I've reached out to local businesses. In fact, a few years ago, when Boeing was having trouble with the city of Mesa, they called me in desperation, as Mesa was planning on implementing some changes to the general plan that threatened the flight paths for the Apache helicopter. And as a young freshman legislator, I engaged, and I convened a meeting. And the power to convene a meeting as a member of Congress or as a member of the state legislature to get people together to talk through problems worked in this situation, and all parties left happy, and the Apache helicopter system was saved. That's the kind of personal, direct engagement, and as a small business owner, a real small business owner who signs the front of the check, I understand very well the needs of the business in this district.
2 years after its passage, SB 1070 is now under consideration by the U.S. Supreme Court. What do you think is the next step in addressing our immigration issues, and how do you balance the need for a local labor force, the requirement to provide educational, healthcare, and other services to illegal immigrants, and the negative publicity that immigration enforcement can engender?
You know, the issue of immigration in this campaign reminds me of the French politician when hearing the clamor in the street said, "There is the mob, I am their leader, I must follow them." The truth of the matter is that we've been leading on this issue on immigration in Arizona for some time. In fact, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find another candidate for Congress that has dealt with this issue as a presiding officer more than I have. Now, I believe that the core provisions of SB 1070 will be upheld by the United States Supreme Court, and I think that's important because local law enforcement should have concurrent jurisdiction to enforce immigration laws. But beyond that, there are 3 specific things that we must do, and we must do today. Number 1, secure the border. It's not rocket science. We've done it in the San Diego sector, in the Yuma sector. We know how to do it. It's just a lack of will. 2, we have to reform the visa system. 40% of those who are here illegally came legally and overstayed on their visas. And 3, we must fix the legal entry system. And this is a point where my opponent and I have a difference. In the last debate before the Tea Party, he said he did not feel that the legal immigration system needed any change, that we just simply needed to enforce the law. He's right. We need to enforce the law. But we have a legal immigration system that is not working, it is not functioning, and as a sovereign country, we are incentivizing people to come here illegally because we have not provided a system that works. I think we need to place emphasis on that. We have the right as a country to decide who should come in, where they fit the skill sets that we need. If they have criminal records, they shouldn't be here, and can they provide for themselves and not be a burden upon our society? That is our right as a free and sovereign country, and our immigration system must reflect that.
Thank you very much. First of all, rather than respond to challenges of my record, I'm going to adhere to the requests of the debate planners and just stick to the issues as we go forward. And I'd like to focus my attention on what I can do rather than what my opponent can't do. I think he's a great guy, and I think that we have different ideas, but in a large way we're very, very similar. I'd also like to say that on the budget, because I do believe I need to respond. I voted against the budget because it still had a lot of pork barrel issues, and so did most of the other people that ended up being the real agents of change that balanced that budget. But let me say about the immigration issue that I completely agree that the first and foremost issue has to be to secure our border. Right now, it's far more than just smuggling people. That's a bad enough issue, but there are terrorists that are coming across the border, there are guns, there are drugs coming across the border, and first and foremost, we have to focus our attention on securing the border. 1070 came into play because the federal government wasn't doing its job. I also believe that we do need some visa reform. I believe that we need to bring the brightest and the best from all countries. I kind of look at it like the NBA. The NBA doesn't care what country you're from, what your religion is. What they care is if you can shoot three-pointers, drive the bucket, and pull down rebounds. I think that America, as we're competing in this global economy, needs to seek out the brightest and the best. And I also believe that we need to make our visa program easier and more responsible, and I think that is a part of the problem as well.
Also considering the viability of the healthcare statute known as Obamacare. What are the positives and negatives of that statute, and do you believe a national healthcare model is necessary?
First of all, no, I do not believe that we should go anywhere toward national health care. We beat that back once. Back when I first ran for Congress in '94, Bill Clinton had given the task to his wife Hillary with Ira Magaziner to go forward and try to create a national health care program, a single-payer system. And I believe that is bad. I believe that our health care system, while it has some issues and needs some fixing, is still the best health care system in the world. And I will do everything within my power. My top priority, along with balancing the budget, is to repeal Obamacare as fast as possible. Not only do I believe it's unconstitutional with the individual mandate, but I also believe that it will bankrupt our country. I also believe that the best way to fix our healthcare system is to give every individual, every small business owner, everybody in America, the same kind of tax benefit that large companies get today, so that they get a write-off their healthcare costs. And if every individual owned their own healthcare policy, they wouldn't have to worry about leaving a job that they hate because somebody in their family has pre-existing conditions. They'd be able to take that policy with them. So to me, that's the most important thing we can do. But along the way, there are a lot of other things, like medical malpractice reform. You get rid of all the unwarranted windfall of lawsuits and rich lawyers over healthcare issues. I also believe that we need to do everything that we can to try to get rid of all the fraud and abuse. I could tell story after story, but I do want to tell one. It's a clear anecdote of what's wrong. I met with a doctor just last week, and he told me that he had a woman come in for a procedure. She slapped down an access card and said, I need a procedure. She needed to have prior authorization. So she couldn't wait. She laid down a Blue Cross Blue Shield card. The doctor said, okay,
thank you.
I'll stop, thank you.
You know, you can't claim leadership on the budget if you didn't vote for it. And if you did, You can take credit for the 22% increase in spending as well. But I want to talk about this question about healthcare. This is the issue of our day. This is the fundamental issue of our day. As a small business owner, this was the issue that got me involved in politics in the first place. As I was seeing 20 and 25% rate increases, struggling each year to continue to provide 100% health insurance for my employees. And I got involved in politics because of that. Now, the President's health care bill must be repealed. Not only because that bill is bad for small businesses and bad for individuals, but it strips our federalist system and makes every state a subsidiary of a nationalized government, and that is not the intent of the United States Constitution. And this is not an election time conversion. While a lot of lobbying was going on in D.C. and the pharmaceutical companies and others were carving out their little piece of the pie for Obamacare, here in Arizona we recognized immediately what a bad bill this was, and we were the first state in the nation to pass the Freedom of Healthcare Act so that you were not required to participate in that system. And when Liberal Attorney General Goddard would not join the lawsuit, we passed legislation to force it. You want to fix health care? There are 3 things you must do. You should own your health care in the same way that you own your auto insurance. It should be portable with the same tax benefits. We have to reinstitute that the prime relationship is between the patient and the doctor, not the patient and a bureaucrat, whether it's a government bureaucrat or an insurance company bureaucrat. And finally, we need transparency in pricing so you, the consumer, can be a consumer, because without price transparency, you can't make economic decisions, and that drives the cost of health care.
Social Security is on a lot of our minds these days, especially for those that are starting to plan the second stage of their lives with retirement. What is your position on Social Security?
Social Security, along with Medicare, should be a great concern to all of us, whether you are 25 years old or 65 years old. It's estimated that by 2014, the combined liabilities of Medicare and Social Security will be $57 trillion. Put that in context of our $15.6 trillion debt. The surest way to kill Social Security is to ignore it. And this is what I mean by the generational choice that we have. We have to make these tough kinds of choices and decisions. In the Ryan plan, he deals with Medicare in, I think, a very smart way, allowing people over the age of 55 to keep it the way it is right now, with people under the age of 55 turning it into a premium support system. I think there are opportunities within Social Security to develop similar structures, so that those of you that are on it or almost on it, those promises can be kept with you. But we can make that system sustainable and something that 25-year-old can afford, so that his taxes don't have to grow so much that his economic prosperity is impacted. This is a generational choice, and I think the American people, frankly, are up to it. I think we reached that point in our history where we're willing to have this sort of grown-up conversation with one another and say, you know what? We can't do things the way we've always done things. Social Security is a prime example of that.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I'm not going to settle for the Ryan budget. I think it is a step in the right direction, but balancing the budget in 25 years is not acceptable to me. I believe that we have to balance the budget soon, now. And I also believe that the biggest conundrum that we face is the entitlement problem. Right now, 65% of the entire budget is eaten up in 5 areas: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Veterans Services, and debt service. By the way, that debt service, 44 cents out of every dollar Washington spent last year was borrowed money. And right now, if we were to pay off the debt, every man, woman, and child would have to come up with $50,000 to balance the debt. That's unacceptable. The biggest conundrum that we face is our entitlement spending. If we do nothing, as I mentioned, right now, 65% of the budget with those 5 areas. In 5 years, 75% of the budget will be consumed in those 5 areas. In 10 years, 100%. In fact, if we cut out all discretionary spending, we still have a $400 billion deficit. And so what I'm proposing to do, and I know it's tough, is that we have to look at this, at Social Security and Medicare and the retirement age. I believe that for those people that have already retired or are getting close to retirement, we let them go ahead and do it as planned. But for people my age, 55 and younger, we need to start adding years to when you're going to retire. When Social Security and Medicare began, the mortality tables showed that people were living to be an age of 63. Now the mortality tables are showing the average age is 78 in this country. I believe that we need to ratchet it down, and by the time you're 30 years old, the retirement age is now 72. We can't keep kicking the can down the road. And yes, there are some good solutions in the Ryan plan, but it doesn't go nearly far enough. And I think that's a clear difference between the candidates up here. I'm not just going to accept the Republican plan lock, stock, and
Thank you,
barrel.
Matt. Matt, Arizona is currently a tax donor state. That means that we provide the federal government and overall taxes collected more money than what we receive back from the federal government in terms of funding. What changes should be made to bring more federal investment to Arizona, and how do you balance the need to get our fair share of federal funding with the need to be fiscally responsible as a country?
Thank you very much. Well, first and foremost, I want to say that I've always been an opponent of any kind of earmarking. I believe it's wrong. And I believe that building bridges to nowhere and funding projects that get people reelected are not the way to go. And that, I believe, is a thing of the past. But now we've moved into a different time, a different generation. The Mesa Gateway Airport is probably one of the most crucial components of our economic development plan here in the East Valley. I talked about the unmanned aerial systems. We need to make sure that we're at the forefront fighting to compete with those competitive dollars, whether it's through the Department of Defense after it's already appropriated, whether it's with the Department of Transportation, whether it's with the research entities that go to Arizona State University. We need to make sure that we're at the forefront fighting after the money has already been appropriated for those dollars to come back to Arizona. Arizonans deserve to have the tax dollars that come out of their pockets coming back to the state. I don't believe that our congressional delegation, as it currently stands right now, does nearly enough to fight to make sure that we're not being a donor state. We're clearly a donor state when it comes to transportation. And every time that transportation bill is passed, states like California get more than they pay in taxes, while Arizona is a donor state. One of the most important fundamental issues I want you to leave here tonight with is that back in Washington, D.C., everything is based on seniority. I'm not saying it's right, but that's the way it is. I will go back with all of my seniority. I'll be able to go back as a fourth-term congressman. That means that the likelihood that I might be able to chair a subcommittee is pretty good. I think that will not only help me to get people to vote the right way, but also make sure that we're fighting to ensure that Arizona's needs are taken care of.
Matt, not accepting the Ryan plan is the same position Harry Reid takes. And I simply do not believe that that is the right position. That Ryan plan has been passed by the House on 3 separate occasions and is the only written plan out there. I would like to see some things completed as well. But the fact of the matter is it solves our problem. And it's a lot easier to have fancy rhetoric without actually having a written plan, which that plan represents. This issue of transportation funding. I think this is an example of the past versus the future. You know, that transportation funding formula was built upon an interstate funding formula system from the 1950s. And you know what? The population center of this country has changed quite a bit since the 1950s. That is part of the reason why Western states, like Arizona, are hurt in that funding formula. That funding formula needs to be updated. But I think we need to do something entirely different, and we need to just change our mindset. Right now, that gas tax that you pay every time at the pump goes to Washington, D.C., and then out of the goodness of their heart, after all the lobbyists and all the maneuvering and all of those with their seniority weigh in and get their little piece of the pie, then a little bit of it comes back to us. That's not the right approach. Instead, states should be able to keep the majority of those gas taxes and remit a surcharge to the federal government for maintenance of the federal highway system, and let states build our own local roads.
It's great that you're enthusiastic and everything, but let's not boo and catcall. So applaud if you want. Remember, they only have 2 minutes, so if you interrupt their time, then that's less time that they're going to have. So let's be civil and let's have fun. Thanks.
Okay, now we're going to go back to Kirk to start off. How do you propose to balance the federal budget?
There's really only one way to get our arms around the debt. Matt was right about the 65% in those 5 programs. 50% in just the top 3, Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. 10 years from now, those 3 programs will consume almost 70%. And the interest on the debt will go from $230 billion to $915 billion. So, very often legislators like to focus on the small ball stuff because it's easy to do and it makes a quick and easy headline. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to solve this problem, you have to go right to the heart, to the core of what it is. And it is our entitlement spending. And again, this is where the Ryan Plan gets us closer to where we need to be by fundamentally reforming the entitlement system. If we don't do that, anything else you want to cut, if you want to eliminate the Department of Energy, if you want to eliminate the man who delivers ice to your offices, if you want to eliminate the Department of Education, whatever it is, you can combine all of that, and it will amount to a hill of beans in reducing our debt. And this is what I meant about it's time that we have a grown-up conversation with each other and stop pretending like we can solve this problem without getting to the root of it. And the root of it is this. We have allowed Washington, D.C. politicians and lobbyists for the last 30 years to convince us that the sun will still come up tomorrow and we can keep spending money like there's no tomorrow. Well, tomorrow is here, and now it is this generation that has to deal with the consequences.
Well, thank you very much. I'm surprised my opponent hasn't seen some of the alternate plans that are out there. Rand Paul has a wonderful plan that balances in 5 years, not 25. And on the House side, there was a Republican conservative budget, very much like his. It only got 100 and some votes, but it came close. And I don't believe that we should let the good be the enemy of the perfect, or the perfect be the enemy of the good. But I do believe that we can do better. I believe, as Kirk said, that the most important issue that we face as a nation is balancing our entitlements, getting those entitlements back on track again. But I also believe that Congress needs to lead by example. That's why one of the first bills I'm going to introduce is going to be the Pay for Performance Act. And essentially it's this. Every year that Congress fails to pass a balanced budget, the congressmen and their staffs and their offices will take a 20% cut in pay. And I believe that's got to be the rallying cry all across the country. When I was there was term limits. This was an idea whose time has come. And I believe that if we do a grassroots effort across the country and put pressure on people to say, are you going to vote for this? Are you going to sign on to this bill? Then ultimately we'll get the pressure up there enough that people will sign on to the bill, and ultimately we'll get it. Of course, I'll also be a big champion of a balanced budget amendment. I will lead the charge as I did before. But that's going to take 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 38 states to ratify. It's a very, very difficult venture. But along the way, in addition to entitlement reform, yes, I believe we've got to get rid of some government agencies. Tell me something. Does the Federal Department of Education educate one child in Arizona? I don't believe so. What about the Federal Department of Energy? It was established by Jimmy Carter so that we could become energy independent. How's that working out? I think it's time to rid ourselves of a lot of the federal spending. Thank you.
Mining is an important industry here in Arizona. We're going to lead off with Matt. However, much of the industry has moved into other countries. What has the impact of federal regulation been on Arizona's mining industry? And how should federal regulations be modified to promote economic growth in Arizona?
The mining industry, like so many other industries in this state and this country, have been impaired by an extremist environmental agenda. We've chased the timber industry out of the state, and they did it in the name of healthy forests. Since we don't thin the forests anymore, we've had the worst wildfires in Arizona's history. Now in Arizona with the mines, all the different regulations that they have to adhere to have, as you said, chased those mines into foreign countries, many in South America. The same thing could be said of our oil and gas industry. In fact, I was in Artesia, New Mexico about 2 months ago on a fracking site. And we have enough oil in this country for the next 100 years. But we haven't built a refinery since the 60s. We have got to be serious about this again. I spent a lot of time in China. And China treats its business like the goose that lays a golden egg. They care more about people than they do lizards and snakes. And in this country, right now, in Artesia, New Mexico, in Midland, Texas, and right here where we have oil-rich supply, they're talking about declaring the sand dune lizard an endangered species. If they do, it'll wipe out all oil exploration. We have to get rid of these extremist regulations that do nothing to significantly improve the quality of our environment. Two last things. I know we talk about mining, but I think that it applies to all industry. The Salt River Project has a Navajo generation plant. They're being asked and may be required by the EPA to add $1 billion to their cleanup, which will do very little, negligible. I believe, as Jeb Bush, who recently endorsed me and is helping me in my campaign, he said every regulation has to have a cost-benefit analysis before enacted.
Thank you.
When it comes to the impact of federal regulations on business, SRP knows us very well with the Endangered Species Act at Roosevelt Lake. And that is resulting from the Endangered Species Act and also an out-of-control EPA. And Matt mentioned briefly the Navajo Generating Station, the impact that will have on regular folks, those of us who pay a water bill every single month, if the Obama administration is successful in shutting down that plant. And it will negatively impact not just mining, but every major industry in the state of Arizona. But when you talk about mining in particular, and when you talk about regulations, we cannot overlook the fact of the impact of taxation on industries that are capital intensive. What do I mean by that? Mining, by nature, is capital intensive. Lots of land, expensive equipment. And when we have confiscatory tax rates that send capital elsewhere because we have the highest corporate income tax rate in the industrialized world, or because we have commercial property taxes in the state of Arizona that are still too high, we are pushing those jobs overseas. This is the reason why 3 years ago I championed what became dubbed the Jobs Bill and ended up being the largest business tax reduction in state history. And I did that with the broad support of the business community because they understand that nobody gets a job until somebody first has capital to invest, to build something, to make something, to expand something. And it's about time that this country got back in the game of capitalism and made this country attractive again for manufacturing and capital-intensive industries by lowering our tax rates.
Kirk, we're going to start with you. Fire season is upon us once again, and we've already got a number of wildfires that have been burning around the state. What changes should be made to the U.S. Forest Service to protect Arizona's natural resources, and what impact can you have on the policies of the U.S. Forest Service to ensure that they are properly managed and that Arizona's natural resources are properly managed?
That's a great question. I'm so glad to hear it asked in this forum, because I don't think it's talked about enough here in the Valley of the Sun. You know, I've spent quite a bit of time talking to Senator John Kyle about this, who's endorsed me in this race, and really has been one of the leading voices in the country for proper forest management. If you go back to the major fire of last season, and you compare the reservation area with the forest land, you will find something really interesting. The forest land, managed by our federal government, was devastated. Yet the land that was managed by the Apaches, where there was thinning that occurred and proper forest management practices, fared much, much better. Now, this is nothing new. We've seen this in the Rodeo Gillespie fire years ago and other major forest fires that we've had in the state. The fact of the matter is that the environmental regulations pushed by radical environmental groups that have killed the timber industry in this state are hurting our forests and our way of life in the mountains. And why that is relevant to people of District 5? It's relevant because those mountains and those trees and that Mogollon Rim is part of our watershed. The quantity and the quality of our water depends upon the health of the forests up on the rim. Each one of us have a vested interest in this. And I think what I would like to see is more cooperation from the Forest Service in working with private sector individuals to go in and strategically thin out those forests. We have a pilot program right now that's happening in the White Mountains. That pilot program is up for renewal. It must be renewed. We have to make a concerted effort, and we once and for all have to tell the environmentalists to go sit down and let us manage our forests.
Thank you. It is a great question. And first and foremost, we have one of the most preeminent experts on forest health in the world that lives right in this state. He's a professor at NAU. His name is Wally Covington, and I've been very, very close to him over the years. Have sought out his counsel, his advice, invited him to testify before Congress. Let me tell you something, though. It's very plain and clear. This isn't going to be worked out with just a kind word to a bureaucrat. We're going to have to force them to change. It's going to take legislation. As I mentioned earlier in my comments about environmentalism in the state, extremist environmentalism, it's impacting our lives everywhere. We've had the 2 worst wildfires in Arizona's history, at least that I can remember, since we chased the timber industry out of the state. And I believe, as I said before, that we've got to have the timber industry back in Arizona. It's a win-win. Nature thins out the forest one way or another, either with beetles, or with fires, or with mankind doing its part. And it was a lot healthier when we had a timber industry. Also, what's going on in Tombstone, Arizona right now? How many of you have been following that? Because of the terrible Wallow fire, a lot of the mudslides have damaged their water delivery system. And the Forest Service is telling them that they can't repair it. If they want to, they have to use horses and shovels. That's crazy. This town is going to dry up and go away if we don't have the guts to stand up to these extremists in this country and fight with everything that we've got to turn our country around. Overregulation is killing this country. Yes, taxation is killing it, but overregulation is killing this country, and that's chasing jobs out of the country, and I'll do everything within my power to roll back these unreasonable regulations.
Matt, it's been said that the F-35 will be the last manned aircraft ordered by the U.S. military. Unmanned aerial vehicles are anticipated for use in applications from everything from law enforcement to commercial transportation to even military operations. how do you see Arizona's current effort to obtain a designation as a center of excellence for UAV development, and what benefits would such a designation bring to Arizona, and what can you do as a congressman to help Arizona be successful in getting that bid?
I'm really glad you asked that question because I've been working on this issue for the last several months. Vice Mayor Scott Summers called me several months ago, and said, Matt, I need your help. I need you to get involved, roll up your sleeves, and help us to get one of those designated classifications as a center of excellence, one of 6 in the country. The Federal Department of Transportation, the FAA, will designate 6 places in Arizona. Many other states are far ahead of the curve. They're out there working the FAA to make sure that they get that delineation. But Arizona has the resources in many, many ways. We've got Fort Huachuca that trains more of these unmanned aerial pilots than anybody else in the world. We've also got the Goldwater testing range. We've also got the Mesa Gateway Airport. We've got East Valley Polytech campus. We've got the Air Force Labs, which still have the top secret top security clearance. Many, many pieces put in place. But we don't have the support, strong support from our congressional delegation. We have our governor that's been working on it. We have our mayor, Scott Smith, that's been working on it. In fact, he's been quoted in the paper several times. And he's voiced his frustration that we don't have any leaders here that are bellying up to the bar to get this done. What will that do for Arizona? It will bring thousands of jobs to Arizona. It is going to happen whether we do anything about it or not. 6 places in the country will get centers of excellence. It might as well be Arizona. We have the talent, we have the skills, we have the people, and we have the brain trust. And I believe we are very well postured, but we've got to put the political muscle. Because unfortunately, and we can squawk about it and complain about it all we want, but political muscle is what gets the job done. You have to fight for something. You have to stand up and be counted. And not only am I willing to do that, but I have been doing that for the last several months.
I'm really glad you asked the question too, because I've actually been working on this issue for several years. I mentioned earlier to you about the problem that we had with Boeing a few years ago. Born out of that problem was a desire to figure out how Arizona could be more attractive to the aerospace industry. Aerospace has always been an incredibly important part of our state since at least the 1950s. In fact, we have the 5th largest footprint for the aerospace industry in the country. But the alarming thing is we're losing market share. And after that experience with Boeing, I convened a meeting with Science Foundation Arizona, Dr. Crow at ASU, General Browning, the leaders at Boeing, and several others, and we sat down in Dr. Crow's office. And we discussed this problem with aerospace and what could we do. A meeting that I convened and called. And you know what came out of that meeting was the genesis of the Arizona Aerospace Institute, which has become the predicate for us hopefully receiving this designation that Matt is talking about. Because if we don't fight for our national defense in the aerospace industry here in the state of Arizona, we will literally lose hundreds of millions of dollars of economic impact in our state each and every year. That's why I've been to the Boeing plant. That's why I've been down to Raytheon and discussed these issues with Raytheon. And that's why I served in an advisory capacity to the board for the Aerospace Institute. Because we need in Arizona to focus on these core industries along with our small employers. These core industries that are like having a Super Bowl every single year in terms of their economic impact. That's the kind of engagement that I was referring to yesterday, or earlier. That's the kind of engagement that I will provide as your next congressman.
Defense spending in connection with military bases in Arizona contributes significantly to our economy. What challenges does Arizona face in retaining those bases, and do you see sequestration affecting federal defense spending in Arizona?
We face significant challenges. In fact, some of the challenges we face are complaints from residents near bases, where bases have been there for a very long time. My friend Matt was the lobbyist for the city of El Mirage and lobbied on noise issues for that city, and many people felt like that was a danger to Luke Air Force Base. I don't think those are the type of activities we should engage in, number one. Number two, we have to continue to make the case that we have special and unique assets here in the state of Arizona that aren't just good for Arizona, but literally are good for the nation's security. The Goldwater Range, for example. There's no other place in the world where our pilots can train like they can at the Goldwater Range. Luke Air Force Base utilizes that range. Fort Huachuca, with their specialized intelligence training and unmanned vehicle training. These are important assets, not just for Arizona, by the way, along with the Yuma Air Base and Davis-Monthan. These are important assets for the country, not just the state of Arizona. Now, I was reviewing the budget 2 weeks ago, the federal budget for the next 10 years, and I noticed something a little alarming. Even before the sequestration cuts occur, defense spending will grow at less than the rate of inflation, which means that 10 years from now, the actual real dollar that we are spending on defense will be less than we're spending today. Now, the United States Constitution provides the top priority as providing for the common defense. And I think these sequestration rules must be addressed. I don't think the military can sustain those types of cuts. I think the United States must maintain the best financed, the best trained, and the toughest 45s in the entire face of the earth.
Thank you. For the record, I did meet with the General Counsel for the Air Force and spoke very strongly in support of the F-35 at Luke Air Force Base, and also met with the Undersecretary over all installations for the entire world to advocate for the same thing. But I want you to know something about defense spending. It's not only important to our economy, but more so, it's important to our freedom. And to me, yeah, it's about the economy. That's really important to me, and I want to make sure that we don't lose jobs here in Arizona. But to me, it's a lot more up close and personal. I've got a lot of skin in the game. You see, my son-in-law is right now a captain in the Army. He's the father of my 3 grandchildren. My nephew is a graduate of West Point. And then he went through the Army Rangers, one of the most difficult training regiments known in the entire military. And then he served a tour in Afghanistan and fought for our freedom. So when I think about our military policy, this is more than just an economic decision for me. This is about our freedom. This is about making sure when our young people go into harm's way, they go there to win. And they go there with the full backing and support of every one of their leaders so that they come home alive. I also want you to know that the sequestration idea is crazy. I know it was there put in place so that the so-called super committee, which was a super bust, would do its job and end up balancing the budget. But right now, if we don't step in the gap and sequestration takes place, $500 billion in the next decade will be cut out of the military budget. It is not a safer world today. We've got to do everything that we can to be vigilant. Like Ronald Reagan, I believe in peace through strength. And I believe that the only way for America to secure its freedom is to be the toughest guy on the block.
Thank you, Matt. Well, I have a lot of other really good questions here, so if you want to stick around later, I'd be happy to ask them.
You can email it to us.
But the one final question I do want to ask you, it's something when I was a reporter I always like to ask people. What is one thing that you could share with us tonight that we may not know about you, and what makes you tick? And for that one, we're going to lead off with Matt.
Well, let me tell you one thing. It is a story about somebody that I love very, very much. It's about my father. Tom Brokaw talked about my father's generation as the greatest generation. I think he did so rightly. These were the people that left their families, their homes, and they went and they fought for our freedoms. My dad fought proudly in New Guinea to protect my freedoms. and my family's freedoms. When he came home, he met my mom. My mom had been in a very, very difficult marriage, an abusive marriage. And she left that marriage to save her children's lives. My father met her, young single mother with 3 children, and he married her. He adopted my 3 older siblings. I didn't even find out they were adopted until I was 18 years old. Because my father never wanted us in a fit of anger to say, well, you're not my real brother. You're not my real sister. So we were raised as one family. That father, when he came back from World War II, had to hold down 3 jobs to make ends meet. I remember my mom telling us a story about how he was working on a jackhammer. It got out of control and it broke an instep on his foot. Dad slept with his boot on for 3 weeks because he knew if he took it off, he wouldn't get it back on because of the swelling. This was a man that had courage and determination. My father taught me that a man's word is his bond. And that you give your word, you keep it. So when I gave my term limit pledge, it was a no-brainer. I knew my dad would kick my butt if I broke my word. I also believe that that generation has a lot to teach us. Now listen to my opponent talk about the new generation. That is important. But we can learn a lot from the past and the great people whose shoulders we stand on today because of the fight that they've done to protect our liberties. Thank you.
A couple things you may not know about me. I speak Tongan and I love Johnny Cash songs. A couple other things you may not know about me. Janae and I have 6 children. We're raising 5. Our 5th child passed away 6 years ago, and I named him, as a father, I took the reins on this one. I named him after President John Adams. He was our little John boy. John passed away in an accident at our home and has become an inspiration to us and our family. And one of the reasons why I am running for Congress today is because I firmly believe that so long as I have the capacity or the opportunity or the luck to be in a position to fight for the future of my kids, I think that's worthwhile. Because I don't think that the path we are on will give them a future that is as prosperous and as free as the one in which I have inherited, which all of us have inherited from our founding fathers. We have an obligation, and I feel that sense of obligation. My good wife, Janae, who's in this fight with me, 100% feels that obligation. And our children, ages 4 to 15, they've been taught to feel that obligation as well, and they feel it. There is no country on the face of the earth that has done more to unite the human spirit with its full potential than this country. And I believe that we are at risk of losing that. And that's what I mean when I talk about this generation. Because I think the politicians and the lobbyists of the past have given us a broken country. A country with problems. And I think it's time for this generation to rise up, take the reins, and fix what has been broken. That's why I'm running.
We're going to move on to our closing comments. I just want to take this opportunity and thank Ginger for what a great job she did. Give her a hand. The way you handled the, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you very much, Kirk. I thought you did a great job with time control. I didn't really even have to do anything. That was wonderful. And speaking of time control, Jeff, thank you very much for the great job of doing that. Okay, so now we'll begin our closing statements. Remember, you're still on the clock. They haven't finished their job yet, so you're still on the clock for 2 minutes. Matt, would you please begin?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you so much to the East Valley Chamber of Commerce for organizing this debate, all the folks that have worked so hard to make this happen. As I said earlier when I introduced myself, I'm applying for a job tonight. I think it's the most important job I've ever applied for in my life. last thing I thought is I'd be applying for this job again. I don't need to be a congressman again. But I believe that I have the skills and the tools to do the job because I've done it before. I went back to Washington, D.C. back in 1994 when the budget hadn't been balanced in over 40 years. And we balanced the budget for the first time in a generation. I was part of the leadership group that got that done. We passed welfare reform. We did amazing things. And yes, I agree. I think many of the politicians back there, I refuse to paint with a broad brush because a lot of the Republicans and a lot of the folks that are back there are part of the problem. But I have been part of the solution. That's why the Citizens Against Government Waste ranked me in the top 5 people out of 535. Don't believe what I say. Believe what the other groups say. They designated me as a taxpayer hero, something very, very few people get. I'm willing to go back and fight the fight because I believe our very future is at stake. My children, my grandchildren, your children, and many of your grandchildren will inherit a worse country than we inherited if we don't stand up and fight on principle and make dramatic change now. We've got to do everything we can to turn this country around. And I believe we can. But if you want to get the job done, give it to somebody who's done it before. Give it to somebody who you know you can trust to keep his word. Thank you. I ask for your vote. And I ask for your support.
You're up. Thank you again to the Chambers for organizing this and for all of you, yes, even you in the Salmon shirts, for being here tonight. A vigorous debate is important for our democracy. You know, I sometimes feel like the predicate of Matt's campaign is sort of like the Bruce Springsteen song, Glory Days. The glory days of when I was in Congress. But upon closer examination, you will find a different kind of record. Not a record of actually exercising leadership to balance the budget, because he didn't even vote for it, didn't serve on any applicable committees, and had no leadership position. Not a record of actually reducing spending, because spending actually increased by 22% during 1994 to 2000. That's a significant amount, and that stands in stark contrast to the route that we have taken here in the state of Arizona. And it reminds me of the quote from Albert Einstein when he said that the significant problems we have today will not be solved by the same level of thinking that created those problems. That's exactly where we're at this point in this country. If we aim to tackle these problems, if we aim to finally, once and for all, reform our entitlements, to bring balance to our budget, to reduce the debt, to reduce taxation and start creating jobs in this country once again, to change the corrupt culture of Washington, D.C., the revolving door from Congress to lobbyists and so forth. If we aim to do that, you will not get there. You will not achieve that if you keep going back to the past. The answer is in the future with a new generation of leadership that has been fighting the battles of this day, a generation that's proven. I've been that leader in Arizona. I can be that leader in Washington because it matters that much to each of us. This is our time to fix it. I'm asking for your vote on August 28th. Thank you so much for being here.